Hello, this is Jason from Liberate Raleigh, and this is another Liberate Raleigh video. You may have noticed that the title of this video is The Voluntary City, Toward a Rebirth of Civil Society. So you may be wondering exactly what the topic here is and what's going on with this video. Well, this is going to be the first in a series of videos, which will cover a particular book that I've had for many years, and that book is The Voluntary City. This is it right here. Had it for I don't know how many years, 10 years or something. Haven't had a chance to read it. So what is this book about, and what is this series of videos going to cover? In order to answer that question, I'm going to place this series of videos in context with some previous videos that I've done. And those videos are the Foundation of Anarchism series, which was a group of videos that I did to cover basic definitions relating to libertarian property rights, leading up to the belief in principled anarchism, or the rejection of the government or the state. So that series of videos was pretty much a description of what those property rights are, what basic definitions there are, the principles that build the foundation upon which we conclude that the government is immoral and should not exist, based on the property rights and the libertarian ethics, political ethics that are covered. So that series of videos pretty much answers the question, what are property rights? What does it mean when you say property rights? What is justice? What do we mean when we talk about monopolies? What is the state? What is anarchy? What are the basic definitions upon which that we are building this system of social organization? So that series of videos answers that question, what? So that's the first set of videos that I want to reference to place the current videos in context. The next video, actually it's not a series of videos, it's simply one video that I actually did a few days ago. It's the morality of private property rights. And in that video, I covered a book called Why Not Capitalism by Jason Brennan. And the purpose of this book was to reply to G.A. Cohen's Why Not Socialism, which was a book that set out with the goal to show that socialism was a morally superior social organization than capitalism was. And Brennan rejected this and wrote a book about it and made moral arguments for the superiority of capitalism over socialism, and made positive rights for why we should prefer, from a moral perspective, libertarian property rights and capitalism. So that particular video answers the question, why? Why should we favor, from a moral aspect, the private property rights that libertarians and libertarian theory goes on about? What is the reasoning behind that? So that video answers why. Now this set of videos, titled The Voluntary City, is going to answer the question, how? How? Now that we know that there's a moral basis for private property rights and capitalism, and we know what those private property rights are, what the foundation, the definitions behind them that leads us to build upon the libertarian ethical edifice and come to the conclusion of anarchism and a free and voluntary society. Having given all those things, how do we go about doing it? How would implementing that form of social order answer the question, how do we do what we do now, the things that the government does? How would these things get done? And that's what this set of videos is going to cover. And that's what this book covers, The Voluntary City. That's pretty much the point of this book. Now, the subtitle of this video, Toward a Rebirth of Civil Society, that is the first chapter in this book, which is a basic introduction to the book as a whole. So what I'm going to do in this series of videos is I'm going to read each chapter, and then I will make a video covering that particular chapter and going over the material, and when I feel that it's necessary, I'll provide my own personal commentary or maybe expand upon things and analyze things in a particular way if I feel that that would be fruitful. But the goal here, at least going in, is to create one video for each chapter, and I believe there are 15 chapters. So the first one is Toward the Rebirth of Civil Society, and pretty much what this chapter does is it just goes over what's in the book and the different services that are provided by, say, the government within a city-based geography. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the table of contents. I'm going to go over this as an introduction, just to go over what's in here. And again, the purpose is to look at each of these services and figure out how private individuals can use voluntary methods to meet these, to implement these services. Okay? So the first one, again, Toward the Rebirth of Civil Society, there are 4 parts to the book, total of 15 chapters. So I'm just going to go through the chapters. I'm going to read them, and so you can get an idea of what is in this book. So chapters 2 through 5 are part of part 1, which is building the voluntary city. So if we take the city unit and look at what functions a city government provides within that city, this book is going to analyze theoretical and historical evidence to show that all of these things that people normally consider publicly provided by various levels of government can and should be provided by private individuals acting in a voluntary manner. So what they cover, chapters 2 through 5, building the voluntary city. So chapter 2, laissez-faire urban planning. Chapter 3, the private places of St. Louis, with the subtitle Urban Infrastructure Through Private Planning. Chapter 4, the voluntary provision of public goods, subtitle The Turnpike Companies of Early America. Yeah, the roads. Everybody wants to know about the roads. And number 5, entrepreneurial city planning, Chicago's Central Manufacturing District. So you can see that in this first part, these chapters cover various ways to organize the city from a meta level planning perspective. How would various types of infrastructure be built throughout the city? How to organize the city. So, for example, Chicago Central Manufacturing District. Where would, say, manufacturing areas be located? How would those decisions be made? So a lot of good information in part 1. Part 2, law and social services in the voluntary city. This is another big topic that people want to know about when you bring up the idea of, well, maybe we should get rid of the government and move on and do things voluntarily. I want to know, well, what about laws and law enforcement? Well, part 2, law and social services in the voluntary city. So there are another 5 chapters, 6 through 10. So chapter 6, justice without government. The merchant courts of medieval Europe and their modern counterparts. Private courts voluntarily implemented in the past. Actual historical evidence to show that this is possible. Next chapter, the private provision of police during the 18th and 19th centuries. private police forces, privately funded and implemented by private individuals through voluntary action. This enormous army, and that's in quotes, that's chapter 8. The mutual aid tradition of American fraternal societies before the 20th century. Number 9, medical care through mutual aid, the friendly societies of Great Britain. And number 10, education in the voluntary city. So here we have 3 chapters that talk about various services that are normally provided by the government. Mutual aid tradition of American fraternal societies. Well, what that is referring to is voluntary mutual aid welfare. So you fall upon hard times if you're a part of this. What was considered a mutual aid fraternal society, that was your safety net, and this was entirely voluntary and done through private means. Medical care through mutual aid, the friendly societies of Great Britain. If you are stricken by some sort of dastardly disease, or something happens to you that affects your health in a deleterious manner, then this, being a part of a friendly society for the purpose of medical care, as a form of medical insurance, all done voluntarily and through private means. This is how things were done back then. And then education in the voluntary city. Obviously, the idea of private education is not unusual. Private schools exist, but the governments, by and large, have their hooks all throughout, even private schools and so on and so forth. But that was at least much less the case, if not entirely not the case in the past. So a lot of good information there. So which we would move on to part 3 in the book, the voluntary city and community. Another 4 chapters. Proprietary communities and community associations. So building communities through voluntary association amongst people, maybe covenant communities. That's a Hans Hermann Hoppe thing. So contractual governments and theory and practice, that's chapter 12. So coming up with ways of governing human activity and behavior through voluntary consent, as opposed to the top-down coercive monopoly of the government. So through voluntary contracts that are consensually engaged in. Privatizing the neighborhood, chapter 13. A proposal to replace zoning with private collective property rights to existing neighborhoods, utilizing private property rights in order to implement and replace zoning. The top-down and fiat decisions of the government coming down, instead of that having private individuals engaging in consensual contracts through the execution of property rights to replace zoning. And this also I would think it would also tie back into building the voluntary city, because this also answers the question of how to organize spatially the city, where things would be located within the city, and that these decisions would be made through voluntary interaction among people, contracts. So that's chapter 13. Chapter 14, the case for land lease versus subdivision, homeowners associations reconsidered. Homeowners associations, another voluntary organization, how would these meet the challenges of providing services that are normally provided by the government? That's another question that this chapter seeks to answer. So that's chapter 14. There's one more part, which is part 4, the epilogue, and that has one chapter, chapter 15, market challenges and government failure. Lessons from the voluntary city, looking at the challenges of meeting these things in the government. Of meeting the provision of these services in a voluntary city. What lessons we can draw from those challenges, and also discussing. And I Again, I've not read the chapters, so I may be speculating a little bit here. Market challenges and government failure. How is it that even though the government technically provides these things, how is it failing in its provision of providing these things? And are the reasons behind that intractable? Would these problems disappear if we went with a market-based solution? That might be the case. I would say that definitely would be the case. That would be my opinion. I'm sure most, if not all, the authors within this book. Again, if I did not clarify, this is an anthology of essays. This is not written by one person. It's edited by David T. Beto, Peter Gordon, and Alexander Tabarrok. Some of the authors in this book that cover various chapters: Stephen Davies, David Beto, Daniel Klein, Robert C. Arnn, Bruce Benson, who also wrote a fantastic book called The Enterprise of Law, discussing the private provision of law and police services. Wonderful book. I highly recommend that if you've not read it. In fact, I may do a series of videos on that book alone. That's how good it is. Anyway, Stephen Davies again, David Beto, David Green, James Tooley, Fred Foldvary. Now, I believe Fred Foldvary is a geoist, which is a modern term for a Georgist. However, my understanding of Fred Foldvary's principles are that he would be considered, and it's been a long time since I have read anything by him. He used to post on a message forum that I frequented at least around 15 years ago. And from his posts on there, my understanding of his position is he is a Georgist geoist. However, he was also an anarchist. So his conception of Georgism and geoism would be entirely voluntary. He would simply, he would want people that would choose to freely live in a Georgia society to live in a Georgia society. His opinion was that was the best way to organize a society, but gave the caveat that people who did not wish to live in that society are free to form their own societies based on whatever organizational principles, say capitalism, socialism, or communism, that they so desired. So while I would disagree with him on Georgism, I would say that I have no real political conflict with him in the sense that I would have any issue with whatever, with his idea of society coming about. I would not have any issue with his version of it being implemented because he provides the voluntary opt-out. People could freely choose not to associate with his Georgist society. And if they wanted to have private property rights and have a capitalist society, that would be fine. So again, I may disagree with him on some practical considerations, but that's pretty much it. So some more authors, Donald J. Boudreau and Randall Holcomb, Robert H. Nelson, Spencer Heath McCallum, and the aforementioned Alexander Tabarrok. So that's the chapters in the book. Those are the topics that are covered. There are two important points that were brought up in the first chapter of the book, Toward a Rebirth of Civil Society, and I want to cover those. I want to mention those, so because I think they're very important. Now, the first one was they make the point that what people think of when they think of the market or the free market or capitalism is sort of small. It's constrained. It's not everything that can properly be placed within private property, free market capitalism. So what I mean by that is most people think of, when they think of a free market or private property capitalism or just the word capitalism, what they think of is profit-seeking organizations, companies, firms, and believe that what it means is that under capitalism, what you have is only profit-seeking institutions. But this is not the case. Capitalism is a system of private property rights, and you are free to execute those property rights in any manner that you see fit. You can build any organization that you see fit. You can pool your resources with other people to build organizations that you see fit, and you can use as a guiding principle anything you wish, as long as you are not violating the rights of other people. So the idea that free market capitalism means exclusively profit-seeking, pro-business things, and that's another thing. People think that free market policies are simply anything that benefits businesses, but that is simply not the case. Free market capitalism is the idea that private property rights are implemented and defended. How you use those private property rights is entirely up to you, as long as you are not violating someone else's private property rights. So it doesn't mean that you must create profit-seeking institutions. You can pool your resources, you can use your resources or pool your resources with other people for the purpose of creating charitable organizations or nonprofit organizations, just as two examples. That is perfectly free, and you are perfectly free to do so. So that's an important point to make, because a lot of criticisms of capitalism as far as being able to provide some particular services rest on the idea that the institutions that would be created would necessarily be profit-seeking. But that doesn't follow. All that follows is that you are free to execute your property rights in any way you see fit, and you can build charters for whatever organizations you wish, using whatever principle you wish. And if you want them to be a nonprofit organization, then that's fine. If you want a charitable organization, that's fine. You can do all of these things. There is no restriction whatsoever. And that's important, because some of the institutions covered in this book are nonprofit and charitable organizations. So, but are completely compatible with free market capitalism. Do not violate it in any way, and that is a very important point. And that was mentioned in the first chapter, and I wanted to bring it up here. Second point, this is a historical point. That first point was a theoretical and philosophical principle point. The second one is a historical point, and that point is, in the past, in history, when the government started implementing these services that we now almost synonymously identify with the government, say public roads or education, these things were provided through private voluntary action. Over time, the government completely, well, I don't want to say completely, but almost completely took over providing those services. From a historical perspective, what happened was not that these things were not being provided and therefore the government had to step in and provide them. No, they were being provided. The government stepped in to expand its power and engaged in the process of crowding out through legislation and other methods to take over those services. So it wasn't a matter of, oh my gosh, if only somebody would come along and make schools and provide education for people, and then the government said, well, no one else is doing it, I guess we need to do it because it's important. Not the case. And that is not the case for pretty much everything. It was not that the government, no one was providing it or doing a really crappy job of providing it. These things were being provided. And again, there's a lot of history in this book. We'll talk about that in later videos and get into more detail regarding that. But the point is, the government engaged in the process of crowding out those private services in order to expand its own power. So that's, I think, another very important point to bring up. And I believe that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover with the introduction. I just wanted to kind of give everyone here an idea of what sorts of services were going to be talked about. and also those two main points. So there's a lot ahead of us here. There's a lot of outstanding material to cover. This is a very big book. This is gonna be quite an undertaking for me. It's gonna take me a while to get through this because I have to read the book and then I have to analyze it and script out video topics to cover and what to talk about. So I'm looking here, and the book there's over 400 pages. 400 pages of material, and if you can see, let me find a good spot here. So, some pretty dense text. There's a lot of text on each page. So this is a very, very big and dense book. So we have quite a journey ahead of us. I am excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. This is kind of like where the rubber meets the road, where people want to know, you know what, Jason, I really find these ideas interesting, but I just don't see how it could work. This is all utopia. You're just living in a fantasy land. This can't happen. Well, this is a good bit of the answer is right here. So, on that note, I will call it quits with this video. Again, I'm looking forward to the rest of them. We got a lot to cover. It's going to be very exciting. I think you're really going to like this. And with that, that's it. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.